Right now, as you watch this, 40 million American homeowners believe they're sitting on the safest investment of their lives. They're wrong. $14.6 trillion. That's the total mortgage debt currently held by American families, the largest single debt category in human history. And within the next 24 months, a significant portion of it will become worthless. Not because of a recession, not because of unemployment, not because people stopped paying their mortgages, because of something far more mechanical, far more inevitable, and far more hidden from public view. The mainstream financial media will tell you the housing market is stabilizing. They'll point to low inventory. They'll celebrate falling inflation. They'll assure you that 2008 can never happen again because regulations are stronger now. They're either lying or they don't understand what they're looking at. Here's what nobody's telling you. There's a pattern. A four-stage mechanism that has preceded every major housing collapse in modern history. It operated in 1926 before the Great Depression wiped out a generation of homeowners. It operated in 1989 before the savings and loan crisis destroyed 1,600 financial institutions. It operated in 2006 before 10 million Americans lost their homes. And right now, in 2024 and 2025, that same pattern is executing, stage by stage, month by month, with mathematical precision. This isn't speculation. This isn't doom-mongering. This is documented financial history repeating in real time, visible to anyone who knows where to look. By the end of this video, you'll understand the exact mechanism driving this collapse. You'll see the three historical precedents that prove this pattern never fails to complete. And you'll recognize exactly which stage we're in right now and what comes next. Once you see this pattern, you cannot unsee it. And once you understand it, you'll realize why 40 million families are about to learn the most expensive lesson of their lives. The house they thought was their greatest asset is about to become their greatest liability. Let me show you how this works. Every major housing crisis in the last 100 years has followed an identical four-stage pattern. I call it the Foreclosure Cascade. Not because I invented it, but because once you see it, the cascade metaphor becomes unavoidable. Each stage triggers the next. Each stage accelerates the timeline, and each stage appears invisible to the general public until it's already too late to escape. Stage 1. The liquidity flood. This is where it begins. Central banks lower interest rates. Credit becomes cheap. Lending standards relax. Money flows into real estate like water finding its level. Everyone feels wealthy. Home values climb month after month. Your neighbor refinances to renovate their kitchen. Your coworker with questionable credit gets approved for a $500,000 mortgage. Nobody questions it because everyone is winning. The foundation of every housing crisis is built on optimism, borrowed optimism, leveraged optimism. And here's the critical detail. During stage 1, the people making the loans know exactly what they're doing. The people taking the loans have no idea what's coming. Stage 2. The rate trap. This is where the mechanism becomes lethal. Interest rates rise. Suddenly, the same mortgage that cost $1,800 per month now costs $3,200. The buyer pool shrinks. Transaction volume collapses. But here's the strange part. Prices don't immediately fall. They hover. They float. Like a cartoon character who's run off a cliff but hasn't looked down yet. This creates the trap. Homeowners who bought during stage 1 are now locked in. They can't sell because prices are softening. They can't refinance because rates have doubled. They can't walk away because they'd lose their down payment. They're frozen, waiting, hoping rates will fall again. They won't. Not in time. Stage 3. The silent default wave. This is where we are right now. Defaults begin, not dramatically, not with headlines, silently. One missed payment here, a forbearance request there. Credit card delinquencies spike, auto loan defaults climb, medical debt accumulates. The dominoes are falling, but they're falling in slow motion. Banks know what's happening. They're not filing foreclosures yet. Why? Because mass foreclosures crash prices. Crashed prices destroy bank balance sheets. So they practice what's called extend and pretend. extend the loan terms, pretend the borrower will recover. It's a delay tactic. It's not a solution, and all it does is compress the inevitable crisis into a shorter, more violent window. Stage 4, the cascade. This is when the dam breaks. Some external trigger, a bank failure, a major default, a liquidity crisis, forces the system to acknowledge reality. Foreclosures accelerate. Inventory floods the market. Prices collapse not in months, but in weeks. The homeowners who were trapped in Stage 2 now discover they're underwater. The equity they thought they had was an illusion. The asset they thought would protect them has become an anchor dragging them down. And here's the part that never makes it into the textbooks. During Stage 4, wealth doesn't disappear. It transfers. From those who didn't see the pattern to those who did. From the 40 million who were frozen to the few thousand who were positioned. This pattern has repeated for 100 years. It has never failed to complete. And right now, we are deep into Stage 3, approaching the threshold of Stage 4. Let me prove it to you with history. Everyone knows about the stock market crash of 1929. Black Tuesday, bread lines, bank runs. It's taught in every high school history class. But here's what they don't teach you. The crash didn't start on Wall Street. It started in Florida, in the real estate market, 3 years earlier. And the pattern that destroyed the 1920s economy is identical to what's happening right now. Let me take you back. It's 1924. Florida is experiencing the first modern real estate bubble. Land speculation has gone absolutely parabolic. The population of Miami has tripled in 3 years. Developers are building entire cities from scratch, selling lots to buyers in New York, Chicago, and Philadelphia who have never set foot in Florida. The marketing was brilliant. Advertisements promised paradise, sunshine, oceanfront property, a new American dream for the automobile age. Here's how the scheme worked. You put down 10% on a piece of land. That's your binder fee. Before your next payment was due, you'd flip the lot to the next speculator at a 20% markup. They do the same thing. Everyone made money. Everyone was a genius. Stage 1 of the foreclosure cascade, the liquidity flood. Credit was everywhere. Banks were lending against land that existed only on maps. Some developers were selling the same lots 3 or 4 times over, betting they'd sort out the paperwork before anyone noticed. By 1925, Miami recorded $7 billion in real estate transactions. Adjusted for inflation, that's roughly $125 billion in today's dollars, in a single city, in a single year. Then came Stage 2, the rate trap. In early 1926, the Federal Reserve began tightening monetary policy. Credit contracted. At the same time, transportation problems emerged. The Florida East Coast Railway declared an embargo on non-essential freight. Suddenly, building materials couldn't reach construction sites. Projects stalled, but prices hadn't crashed yet. They were hovering, frozen, just like today. Speculators held on, waiting for the next wave of buyers. Those buyers never came. Then came the trigger. September 18, 1926, a Category 4 hurricane slammed into Miami with 150-mile-per-hour winds. 400 people dead, 40,000 homeless, entire developments flattened. But here's the detail nobody mentions. The hurricane wasn't the real disaster. The real disaster was what it revealed. When insurance adjusters and out-of-state investors finally traveled to Florida to inspect their properties, they discovered something remarkable. Much of the oceanfront property they'd purchased was swampland, literally underwater. Always had been. The scam was exposed, and Stage 3 began overnight. By the end of 1926, Florida land values had dropped 90%. $1 billion in paper wealth evaporated. That's approximately $18 billion in current dollars. Gone in months. But here's what matters. Everyone said it was a local problem. Florida's issue. The national economy was fine. The stock market was still rising. President Calvin Coolidge declared the economy absolutely sound. They were wrong. Those Florida land deals had been financed by banks across the country. Rural banks in Ohio, community banks in Kansas, savings institutions in Massachusetts. They'd all gotten exposure to Florida real estate because the returns were irresistible. When the land became worthless, those banks started failing. Quietly at first, then in waves. Between 1926 and 1929, before the stock market crash, over 600 American banks failed. The poison was already in the financial system. The stock crash in October 1929 wasn't the cause of the Great Depression. It was the symptom. The real estate contagion had already spread. Stage 4 hit in 1931 and 1932. Banks began calling in mortgages early, not because borrowers had defaulted, because the banks needed liquidity to survive. Your mortgage wasn't your security. It was the bank's emergency exit. Between 1930 and 1935, an estimated 1 million American families lost their homes, not because they stopped paying, because the system collapsed around them. And here's the detail that should make your blood run cold. The wealthy knew. In 1928, a full year before the stock market crashed, insiders began moving their money. John D. Rockefeller shifted his portfolio into treasury bonds. J.P. Morgan personally moved $60 million in gold to European vaults. They saw the pattern completing. They positioned themselves accordingly. The average homeowner didn't know anything was wrong until the foreclosure notice arrived. Same pattern, same stages, same outcome. Now let me show you how it happened again. Jump forward 60 years. It's 1986. Ronald Reagan is president. The economy is supposedly booming. Wall Street is printing money. Everyone believes in morning in America. And 1,600 financial institutions are about to die. The savings and loan crisis is the collapse nobody remembers because it didn't happen all at once. It happened slowly, like carbon monoxide poisoning. You don't notice anything wrong until you're already dying. Here's how the foreclosure cascade executed. Stage 1 began in 1980 with the Depository Institutions Deregulation and Monetary Control Act. Translation: Congress removed restrictions on what savings and loan banks could do with depositors' money. Before 1980, S&Ls were boring. They took deposits. They made mortgages. They operated in their local communities. Conservative, stable, essential. After 1980, they became casinos. The new rules allowed S&Ls to invest in commercial real estate, junk bonds, land development deals, and speculative construction projects. The same institutions holding your grandmother's savings account could now gamble on strip malls in Phoenix and office towers in Dallas. And gamble they did. Between 1982 and 1986, commercial real estate lending by S&Ls increased 300%. In Texas alone, S&Ls financed entire office parks with zero tenants. Buildings were constructed not because there was demand, but because there was financing. Pure speculation backed by federally insured deposits. Stage 2 arrived by 1985. The trap was set. Commercial real estate vacancy rates in the Southwest hit 30%. 3 out of every 10 buildings sitting completely empty. The income to support the loans simply didn't exist, but the S&Ls couldn't admit their investments were worthless. If they marked their assets to reality, they'd be immediately insolvent. So they did what financial institutions always do when cornered. They lied. They rolled over bad loans, extended terms, made new loans to cover old losses. The accounting term is zombification, dead institutions walking. And here's the smoking gun that should enrage you. In 1984, federal regulators at the Federal Home Loan Bank Board knew exactly what was happening. Internal memos documented that nearly 500 S&Ls were technically insolvent, bankrupt, finished. They buried the reports. Why? They didn't want to spook the market. They believed they could manage the problem quietly. Let the weakest institutions fail slowly. Avoid panic. That strategy works right up until the moment it doesn't. Stage 3 accelerated in 1987. The Texas real estate market collapsed. Oil prices crashed. The regional economy that was supposed to support all those speculative buildings disintegrated. Defaults exploded. But here's the critical detail most people miss. The foreclosures that hit average homeowners weren't because individual families failed. They were because the institutions holding their mortgages failed. When an S&L was seized by regulators, your mortgage became an asset on a government liquidation schedule. And the vulture funds circling those failed institutions had no interest in your payment history or your circumstances. They wanted to liquidate quickly. They wanted cash. Hundreds of thousands of families who had been making on-time payments to a trusted local bank suddenly found themselves dealing with a collections agency in another state. Terms were changed. Foreclosure proceedings accelerated. Communities that had nothing to do with Texas oil speculation or Phoenix office buildings were devastated by contagion. By 1989, the dam broke completely. Stage 4. The Resolution Trust Corporation was created to manage the disaster. When the final accounting was done, taxpayers were on the hook for $132 billion. Over 1,600 institutions ceased to exist. An estimated 300,000 American families lost their homes, not because of their own decisions, because of institutional failure they never saw coming. And here's the truly insane detail. Many of these S&Ls had invested depositor savings into the same risky real estate projects they were financing. Your savings account was funding the bubble that would eventually destroy your savings account. The snake was eating its own tail. The crisis only ended because home prices in coastal markets kept rising. California and New York essentially bailed out Texas and Arizona. The disease wasn't cured. It just moved to a different part of the body. Same pattern, same stages. Stage 1. Liquidity flood through deregulation. Check. Stage 2. Speculation creates unsustainable prices. Check. Stage 3. Silent default wave. Regulatory cover-up. Check. Stage 4. Cascade of failures. Massive wealth transfer. Check. Now let me show you the dress rehearsal, the one you definitely remember. You know this story. Lehman Brothers, Bear Stearns, subprime mortgages, too big to fail, foreclosure signs on every block. But I'm going to show you the frame everyone missed, the structural mechanism that made the 2008 collapse not a surprise, but an inevitability, because understanding 2008 is the key to understanding what's happening right now. The official narrative is simple. Greedy banks made risky loans to unqualified borrowers. Those borrowers defaulted. The system crashed. It's a comforting story. It suggests the problem was specific, containable, and fixed by regulations afterward. It's also incomplete. Stage 1 didn't begin with subprime mortgages. It began in 2001 when the Federal Reserve slashed interest rates to 1% in response to the dot-com crash and 9/11. Money became essentially free. But here's the accelerant nobody discusses. In 2004, the Securities and Exchange Commission made a quiet regulatory change called the Net Capital Rule Adjustment. This change allowed the 5 largest investment banks to leverage themselves at 30-1 instead of the previous limit of 12-1. Read that again. Banks could suddenly gamble $30 for every $1 they actually had. Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, Merrill Lynch, Lehman Brothers, Bear Stearns, all of them immediately maxed out. They needed somewhere to put all that borrowed money. They chose housing. The machine was elegant in its brutality. Originators made subprime loans to anyone with a pulse. Investment banks packaged those loans into securities called CDOs, collateralized debt obligations. Rating agencies slapped 8AA ratings on products they knew were garbage. And institutional investors, pension funds, retirement accounts, foreign governments, bought them as safe investments. The originator made their fee. The investment bank made their fee. The rating agency made their fee. Risk was transferred to the final buyer. And nobody along the chain cared if the homeowner could actually afford the payment. Stage 2 crystallized in 2005 and 2006. The Fed began raising rates. The adjustable rate mortgages that had been sold with teaser rates began resetting. A $2,200 monthly payment became $2,400, then $3,100. But housing prices were still rising. The trap was invisible because equity masked everything. Homeowners who couldn't afford their new payments simply refinanced into another toxic loan. The music kept playing. Until it didn't. Stage 3 began in early 2007. Delinquencies in subprime mortgages began spiking. The first wave of defaults hit. But here's how we know the system knew exactly what was happening. In 2006, Goldman Sachs created a CDO specifically designed to fail. The internal name was Abacus 2007 AC1. They sold it to clients as an investment. Simultaneously, they bet against it, purchasing credit default swaps that would pay out when the CDO collapsed. When it did collapse, Goldman made billions. Their clients lost everything. This isn't conspiracy theory. This came out in Senate hearings. It's documented fact. Goldman paid $550 million in fines but admitted no wrongdoing. They saw the pattern completing. They positioned themselves on the winning side of the wealth transfer. Stage 4 hit in September 2008. Lehman Brothers filed the largest bankruptcy in American history. Credit markets froze overnight. Banks stopped lending to each other. The commercial paper market, the bloodstream of the American economy, stopped flowing. Within 24 months, 3.8 million American families lost their homes to foreclosure. Not the irresponsible borrowers the media focused on. Millions of families who had done everything right, who had made their payments, who had followed the rules. They lost because the system failed around them, because counterparty risk cascaded through every institution, because when the music stopped, there weren't enough chairs. And here's the ending nobody talks about. We didn't fix the problem. We transferred it. The Federal Reserve dropped interest rates to zero. They printed $4.5 trillion. They purchased toxic assets from bank balance sheets. They absorbed the losses that should have destroyed the institutions that created them. That money had to go somewhere. And it went directly back into the same asset class that just crashed: real estate. We solved a debt crisis by creating more debt. We solved a housing bubble by inflating a larger housing bubble. We didn't eliminate the leverage. We concentrated it. And now, 16 years later, we're standing beneath a bubble twice the size of 2008. The pattern isn't just repeating, it's amplifying. Now let me show you exactly where we are in the foreclosure cascade. And let me give you specific numbers, specific dates, and specific events. Because this isn't prediction. This is pattern recognition applied to documented reality. We completed stage 1 between 2020 and 2022. COVID created the conditions for the largest liquidity flood in human history. The Federal Reserve dropped rates to zero. The federal government injected $5 trillion in stimulus. Mortgage rates hit 2.65%, the lowest ever recorded. Money didn't just flow into real estate, it flooded. Between January 2020 and June 2022, national home prices increased by 47%. Not 47% over a decade, 47% in 30 months. A house that sold for $300,000 in January 2020 was supposedly worth $441,000 by mid-2022. Paper wealth creation on an unprecedented scale. But here's what the appreciation numbers hide. That increase wasn't driven by income growth. Wages rose approximately 12% in the same period. The gap between prices and incomes stretched to the widest level ever recorded. According to the Atlanta Federal Reserve's Homeownership Affordability Monitor, as of late 2024, the median American household would need to spend 43% of their gross income to afford the median-priced home. The historical average is 25%. We're not 10% above sustainable levels. We're not 20%. We're 72% above the historical affordability threshold. That's not a market. That's a mathematical impossibility waiting for resolution. Stage 2 locked into place in 2022 and 2023. The Federal Reserve raised interest rates from 0.25% to 5.5% in 18 months, the fastest rate increase cycle in 40 years. Mortgage rates exploded. The average 30-year fixed rate went from 2.65% to over 7.5%. The monthly payment on a $400,000 home with 20% down increased from $1,297 to $2,236, a 72% increase in carrying cost. Transaction volume collapsed. Existing home sales dropped 38% from peak. The buyer pool shrunk to first-time purchasers who had no choice and cash buyers who didn't need financing, but prices didn't collapse. They softened slightly. They floated. Just like 1926, just like 2006, the trap was set. Here's who's caught in it. Between 2020 and 2022, approximately 17 million mortgages were originated. 63% of those went to first-time buyers purchasing at peak prices with minimal down payments, often 3.5% through FHA loans. These buyers have virtually no equity buffer. A 10% price decline puts them underwater. A 15% decline erases their entire investment. A 20% decline makes walking away the rational financial decision. They can't sell because they'd lose their down payment. They can't refinance because rates have doubled. They can't stay if prices drop because their mortgage exceeds their home value. 17 million families, frozen, waiting, trapped, and we are now deep into stage 3. The silent default wave is already underway. The signs are everywhere if you know where to look. As of Q4 2024, credit card delinquencies have reached 3.4%, the highest level since 2011. Auto loan delinquencies have hit 2.9%, also the highest in over a decade. Buy now, pay later defaults have exploded by 127% year over year. This is the leading indicator. When households start missing credit card payments and car payments, mortgage defaults follow within 6 to 12 months. The sequence is predictable. The timeline is mathematical. But here's what's different this time. The banks aren't filing foreclosures. Not yet. And there's a strategic reason. If banks flood the market with foreclosed properties, prices crash. Crash prices mean more homeowners go underwater. More underwater homeowners default. More defaults mean more foreclosures. It's a death spiral. Once it starts, it accelerates. So the banks are doing what they did in the S&L crisis. Extend and pretend. Loan modifications. Forbearance agreements. Deferred payments added to the back end of loans. They're not solving the problem. They're delaying it, compressing the inevitable wave into a shorter, more violent window. And here's where the external trigger enters the equation. Commercial real estate. Right now, $1.2 trillion in commercial real estate loans are maturing between 2024 and the end of 2026. These loans were written when office buildings were full and retail was thriving. Those buildings are now 25 to 30% vacant. Remote work hollowed out downtown offices. E-commerce gutted retail. The income to service these loans no longer exists. The default rate on commercial real estate loans has already hit 6.4%, triple the historical average. And it's accelerating. When these loans default, when these buildings get liquidated at 50 cents on the dollar, those losses flow directly into the balance sheets of the banks that also hold your residential mortgage. This isn't speculation. We can see it happening in real time. In March 2023, Silicon Valley Bank collapsed in 48 hours. Then Signature Bank. Then First Republic. 3 major bank failures in 8 weeks. The fastest bank-run cascade since 1929. The trigger was unrealized losses on bond portfolios. The same type of losses that commercial real estate is about to generate across the regional banking system. Regional banks hold 70% of all commercial real estate debt. These are the same banks that hold mortgage servicing rights for millions of residential loans. When they fail, when they're seized by the FDIC, your mortgage becomes an asset on a liquidation schedule. Just like the S&L crisis. Same mechanism, same outcome. And layered on top of all of this is the derivatives exposure. U.S. banks currently have $210 trillion in outstanding derivatives contracts. Let me put that in perspective. That's approximately 8 times the entire U.S. GDP. Most of these contracts are interest rate swaps and credit default swaps tied to real estate debt. They're interconnected promises between institutions. Bank A promises to pay Bank B if certain conditions are met. Bank B promises to pay Bank C. The chain extends across the entire financial system. It works perfectly, as long as everyone can pay. The moment one link breaks, the entire chain explodes. In November 2024, Deutsche Bank announced $1.2 billion in losses on real estate-linked derivatives. Not a default, just losses. That's the first crack in the dam. Here's what happens when Stage 4 triggers. One major institution fails to meet a margin call on derivative contracts. Every other institution freezes. They stop lending. They stop trading. They hoard liquidity. Credit markets seize. And when credit freezes, the housing market dies. Because 90% of home purchases require a mortgage. No credit means no buyers. No buyers means prices collapse. The Federal Reserve knows this is coming. That's exactly why they've been absorbing mortgage-backed securities onto their balance sheet. They're trying to become the buyer of last resort. But the scale exceeds their capacity, and the political constraints on another bailout are severe. Let me give you the roadmap. This is how the dominoes fall. Q1, Q2, 2025. Commercial real estate defaults accelerate. Regional banks holding concentrated CRE exposure begin failing, not the names you know. The mid-tier lenders in Phoenix, Nashville, Austin, and Boise. When one goes under, depositors panic. Modern bank runs don't look like the 1930s. There are no lines outside branches. It's people clicking transfer on their phones at 2 a.m. Q2, Q3, 2025. Credit contagion spreads. Consumer credit defaults spike. The households that were already behind on credit cards and auto loans start missing mortgage payments. The sequence is mechanical, predictable. When you can't pay everything, you pay the credit card first because that's immediate. You pay the car loan second because you need transportation. The mortgage comes last because foreclosure takes months. This is when the silent wave becomes audible. Q3, Q4, 2025. Forced selling begins. The homeowners who bought at peak valuations with 3.5% down realize they're underwater. Walking away becomes the mathematically rational choice. Why continue paying $450,000 on a mortgage for a house worth $380,000? Foreclosure inventory enters the market. But there are no buyers. Interest rates are too high. Credit is too tight. The bid-ask spread widens into a chasm. Late 2025-2026, the Cascade. Prices fall 20-30% nationally, faster in the overheated markets. Austin, Phoenix, Boise, Las Vegas, Nashville. The cities that saw 50-80% appreciation in 3 years see the largest reversions. Banks holding these mortgages are forced to mark assets to market. Capital requirements are violated. Lending freezes completely. And if you need to sell, there are no buyers. If you need to refinance, there are no loans. If you need to tap your equity, there is no equity left. That's when 40 million homeowners wake up and realize the trap has closed. Now I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, this time is different. Those 4 words have been spoken before every financial collapse in recorded history. They are the most expensive words in the English language. You're thinking the banks are more regulated now. They are. The regulations didn't stop Silicon Valley Bank from collapsing in 48 hours after passing its stress test 1 month earlier. Regulations work until they don't. Speed breaks models. You're thinking the government will bail everyone out again. Will they? The 2008 bailout cost approximately $5 trillion in Federal Reserve asset purchases and Treasury programs. The current mortgage market is $14.6 trillion. Commercial real estate adds another $5 trillion. Consumer credit another $5 trillion. The scale of the current bubble is more than double 2008. The national debt is $36 trillion, the annual deficit is $2 trillion, the political appetite for bailing out homeowners and banks simultaneously does not exist. The Fed can print money, but they cannot print trust. They cannot print income growth. They cannot print affordable housing. The math demands resolution. Leverage must unwind. Prices must reconnect with incomes. The gap is too large to bridge with policy. The only question is whether the resolution is gradual or sudden. And history suggests it's never gradual. Let me bring this back to where we started. 40 million American families believe their home is their greatest asset, their security, their retirement, their legacy for their children. The pattern says otherwise. Stage 1. The liquidity flood. 2020-2022. Unprecedented money creation. Record low rates. Prices divorced from incomes. Check. Stage 2. The rate trap. 2022-2024. Rates doubled. Buyers frozen. Sellers stuck. The scissors closing. Check. Stage 3. The silent default wave. Now. Consumer credit cracking. Commercial real estate failing. Banks extending and pretending. Check. Stage 4. The cascade. Coming. The trigger is loaded. The mechanism is engaged. The timeline is compressed. This pattern has executed in 1926, in 1989, in 2008. The details change. The mechanism remains identical. And it has never, in a century of documented history, failed to complete. The wealth won't disappear. It will transfer, from those who didn't see the pattern to those who did, from the millions who were frozen to the thousands who were positioned. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm showing you what is. The interpretation and action are yours. But understand this. By the time the pattern becomes obvious to everyone, by the time it makes the evening news, by the time your neighbor admits their house is underwater, the opportunity to position will have passed. The door will have closed. In every crisis, fortunes are not destroyed. They are transferred. The only question is which side of that transfer you're standing on. If this changed how you see the housing market, if this pattern now seems as obvious to you as it does to me, I need you to do something. Subscribe. Not because it helps the algorithm, though it does, but because the next video is where I'm going to show you exactly how the transfer happens. The specific mechanisms. The specific asset classes that benefit. The specific markets that crash first and hardest. Because this story is far from over. The cascade hasn't started yet. There's still time. But there isn't much. Hit the notification bell. When stage 4 triggers, it will happen fast. And the information you need won't be on the evening news until it's already too late. I'll see you in the next one.